Hello, everyone. I'm Jörg Schlatter. I'm the manager of the ACS Student and Postdoctoral Scholars Office, and it's a great pleasure to meet you all today on a late Tuesday afternoon to talk a little bit about the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program. And as a former program director for this program, I'm happy to point out specific items which I believe are really critical to understand and to wrap the head around, and I will provide some tips. But to be honest, it doesn't really matter what I tell you. It's more important to hear directly from individuals who went through that experience just a couple of months ago. And therefore, I'm really delighted that I will be joined later today by Audrey Odwar, Johanna Masterson, and Matthew Howell. And in about 20 minutes, they will join me in this session, and we will be able to have a good discussion about how they really prepared themselves for writing a competitive fellowship application. And at this point, I would like to ask quickly just my colleague, Justin. Justin, do you see all the slides all right? Do you hear me properly?
Yes, everything sounds good and looks great.
Okay, I think there's no reason to stop. Let's just move on. So, I could imagine that you have probably numerous questions, and I would encourage you to use the question function in GoToWebinar, which is in the lower third of your GoToWebinar panel. Type in your question. I will attempt to follow all the questions. I will cluster them around themes, and I would field those questions later to our panelists. Or if I feel it's appropriate to answer that as a former program director, I would answer them in the second part of our session today. A brief outline, what's happening today. So a quick overview of the NSF GRFP, some tips, then we will hear the stories of recent GRFP awardees, and we have a longer Q&A session. The Graduate Research Fellowship Program is administered by the National Science Foundation and is seen as a program that helps recruit individuals into the STEM disciplines. NSF GRFP has two major goals. The first one is really to select, recognize, and financially support individuals who have demonstrated the potential to be high-achieving scientists and engineers early in their careers. Focusing on that goal, I have to point out two things. First, demonstrated potential. Keep that in mind as we go through this 1 hour. How have you demonstrated the potential to be a high-achieving scientist or engineer? The second thing is early in your career. What does NSF mean with that? Not necessarily you must be 22. Age doesn't matter. Early in your STEM career, right? So either you finished your undergraduate degree, or you're about to finish your undergraduate degree, or you're in your first or second year as a graduate student. So that is what ACS really means with that. The second goal to keep in mind is that the NSF GRFP is there to broaden participation, right? To broaden participation in STEM, and that includes underrepresented groups such as women, minorities, persons with disabilities, and veterans. Keep those two goals in mind as we talk today about the GRFP Fellowship. There are really three major reasons to really apply or to prepare for applying, right? The first one is if everything works well, if you provide all the significant personal information, if you submit the statements, the personal statement, the research statement, you have great reference letters, well, it could be that you're one of the winners, that you're one of the awardees, and it's really great. You get $138,000 over 5 years, and it's a fellowship to you, not to your PI, not to your specific research project or to your institution. It's there to support you because NSF really has seen, with the help of reviewers, that you are one of the major key players in our society in the United States of America in the future. And therefore, that's an investment which is made for you specifically. So as an awardee, you could choose your project, you could choose your advisor, and actually your graduate program. There's no restrictions, and it's portable, right? So if you say after 1 year, well, actually, I would like to continue my studies, not at this university where I'm right now. I would like to move across the country. You guess what? Call up the NSF, let them know about your plans, get the approval from the program director, and just move with your money to a different institution. This is really cool. In 2020, 313 fellowships were awarded in the chemical sciences alone. That is way more than 10% of all fellowships awarded. This is really a great, great number, and I would encourage you to really let that sink in. Reason number two, if you are doing exceptionally well in that hard competition and you don't get the money, but you might get an honorable mention, that is really considered a significant national academic achievement, and it stands out on your CV, on your resume, wherever you go, whatever you would like to approach later on, write it on, because that shows there's an individual. You are able to craft an application, a proposal that is reviewed favorably by NSF, and that weighs a lot. In all jobs, you will have to pitch projects and statements, and you have to write them in a way that they resonate. And that is a way how to demonstrate that. In 2020, 325 honorable mentions were given in the chemical sciences alone. And the third benefit, and I think this is really so significant, it's individual development for you. The benefit of experiencing the GRFP application process helps you to learn about yourself, helps you to develop a cohort of reference writers. It helps you discover actually your motivations, your strengths and your values. And whenever you craft the materials, the statements, it's easy to take those materials and use them for a regular graduate school application, if you're not already in grad school, right? Also, it helps you with honing your grant writing skills, and you think deeply about which career trajectory you would like to take later on. And again, NSF is not looking for the next generation of professors in the chemical sciences. They're looking for the makers and shakers in our society later on, which have this privilege to have this research based PhD or graduate program experience, and they will take that experience and do something great later on. And you could do that in any of those career areas: academia, industry, nonprofit, or you could become an entrepreneur. Those are the three reasons which I really wanted to share with you. Please print out the program solicitation, which is available at nsfgrfp.org. This document includes everything what you have to know: deadlines, program description, award information, eligibility, application preparation, submission, instructions, and they talk about review criteria. This is the heart of that whole competition. Print it out, read it, reread it. Today, I would like to touch briefly on a very important point which determines actually your specific deadline. I would talk about specific components of the application that you have to craft. And also, I will touch on the application review criteria. First, you have to be clear fairly early on. What is your field of study in which you would like to conduct research? Why is that important? Well, this determines A, the deadline, and B, it determines who of the reviewers will actually look at your application, right? If you submit in the wrong field, then people who are not really aware of that field which you're proposing to discover would look at it and might not be able to understand the brilliance which you bring to that application. So this is really critical. Identify the research focus you would like to pitch in the NSF GRFP application, discuss it with your advisor, and make sure that very early on you know which field of study is the field of study you would like to conduct your work in. This is the general list of field of studies which you will find on the NSF GRFP website. And you will notice that I flagged several of those field of studies because they are field of studies, those are the field of studies where ACS is really supporting individuals, right? We support individuals in chemistry in all kinds: organic, synthetic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, name it. Engineering, chemical engineering, different deadline. Geosciences, we have geochemistry, for example, right? Or biogeochemistry or geobiochemistry. We have life sciences. Biochemistry is in that field. Materials research, chemistry of materials, STEM education, that would include chemical education. So be very clear early on what is your field of study and really figure out when your deadline is. I promised, after looking at a factor which determines your specific deadline, we will look at the application package. There are 5 things to consider, right? You have to provide a lot of personal information on education, work, research experiences, your proposed field of study, honors, awards, and publications. You will get that material. You might have that already. A personal statement has to be submitted. And this is really one of the main documents which will convey that you're a competitive candidate or not. The same for the graduate research statement. Of course, reviewers will look at transcripts and they will look at reference letters. 2 are required to be reviewed. 3 are recommended. I will talk a little bit about reference letters later. So reviewers will actually look at the whole application package holistically. And before you sit down and actually start working on any of those 5 components, I would like you to sit down with a pencil and a sheet of paper and think about following questions. What is really unique, distinctive, or impressive about you or your life story? What details of your life might help the reviewers better understand you and set you apart from other applicants? And believe me, you have a unique story, and tell that story, right? Share with them how you became interested in the field, right? How have you learned, how have you capitalized on opportunities that were available to you, right? There's a huge difference if you were in one of the states in the middle of the United States, that very likely you had not as much access to infrastructure as individuals at larger cities with large research universities. Share the story, how you took advantage of opportunities available. So reviewers will look at all 5 components and they will ask 2 questions. What is the demonstrated intellectual merit and what are the demonstrated broader impacts of you? Let me talk about those 2 criteria. In the context of GRFP, they would like to see your potential to advance knowledge. Of course, they will look at your grades, at the curricula you have taken, at your awards. That is really something they could see on the application. But also, they will look at the plan which you submit to conduct a certain research project. How well it is crafted, how you communicate a scientific idea will be used to judge your intellectual merit. They will also look at if you have taken initiative or solved problems and how persistent you were in the past. They will how is your potential, how the potential of your approach to your field of study and your research plan to advance knowledge is really critical for determining your intellectual merit, right? And intellectual merit could be drawn from all components of the application: the personal statement, research plan, letters, experiences, awards, achievements, and transcripts, etc. It's really all over the place. And you have to communicate that clearly to the reviewer. Not easy, but doable. And it takes time to do that. Briefly about broader impacts. What is the potential? What is the potential impact of you on the society? Right? As a person, what have you done before that showed that you're really interested in helping society? But also, what is the potential impact of the proposed research in that little research statement which you're submitting? And of course, the question is, why is that particular research project important? And keep in mind, they're not funding a research project, they're funding you as a person. And whatever you propose, NSF will not hold you accountable for doing exactly what you're proposing there, but they will hold you accountable if you apply, for example, in chemical engineering, that you work on a chemical engineering project and that you join a chemical engineering department. That is the only expectation. So how can you demonstrate the societal benefits which you could bring to the table, right? So ask yourself, how have you helped increase participation of underrepresented groups, including women, students with disabilities, and veterans, etc. Have you engaged in any of those activities? Have you served as a mentor? If yes, to whom? How many people did you impact? What happened to those people? What was your impact on those individuals? Have you engaged in public outreach or public engagement events? Have you worked with a library to host sessions on STEM? Right? Important. Share with the reviewers your contributions to science clubs, to radios, to TV, newspaper, blogs, whatever it is. Share with them how you have shared information. I also would like to point out that it doesn't have to be necessarily just scientific, right? If you have served as an organizer of a big concert or a big event in general, where you have helped people to gain something, right? I think discuss that with your advisor, discuss that with your mentors, discuss that with your network, if they feel if it's appropriate to sell it in the GRFP application. But again, it could indicate that you're in general very much interested in having a broader impact. And again, broader impacts can be found in all parts of the application. You saw that slide earlier, and we will talk with our panelists specifically about the personal statement and research statement. Let me share with you a couple of words on reference letters. Reference letters for GRFP are different from regular graduate school letters. Often, reference letter writers do not really embrace the fact that they should comment on intellectual merit and broader impacts. So please share the web resources on NSF GRFP with your reference letter writers to make them understand that they should use, if possible, headings with intellectual merit and broader impacts. It will be critical that you're not only asking a reference letter writer about, can you write a reference letter? And if they say, yeah, I can write a reference letter, that might not be the best answer you want to have. You want that someone really replies immediately and enthusiastically, yes, I will write a great reference letter. And if they don't have the right information right now, they might ask you to share with them the statements, personal statement and research statement. If they don't ask it, give it to them anyway, so they could really see what you're proposing to do, what you have talked about in your statements. And ideally, they would reiterate in some way and make another point that you really did those outreach events and that you are really interested in broadening participation in broader impacts in general. Mention to your reference letter writers that they should not mention your GRE, because GRE doesn't play any role in this competition, right? So, and they shouldn't mention that either. That would just distract reviewers. And I think with that, I will just leave it here at the reference letter section. As promised, a couple of tips from a former program director. I heard over and over, yes, I would have loved to spend more time, but I ran out of time and it started too late. Please, today, if you really would like to apply, start making a plan today or tomorrow, right? Print out the solicitation, read it once, twice, 3 times, take a text marker, and really circle all the important parts which are really critical for you to understand. Make sure that you understand the whole document. If you have any questions, for example, about eligibility, or if your field of study or if your research project would really align with the vision of NSF GRFP, for example, keep in mind, biomedical research is not supported If you do propose anything in biochemistry, you might want to reach out to the operations center using the email address listed here, info@nsfgrfp.org, to get clarification if that is something what is actually supported by NSF. What you would like to avoid is you submit it, and then you learn, well, it was not reviewed because you didn't really acknowledge that NSF does not fund projects or funds individuals doing work which could be funded by NIH, right? Those things. Or eligibility, if you have any questions about that, reach out to the colleagues at the NSF GRFP Operations Center. Use intellectual merit and broader impacts headlines in your statements to make it really easy for reviewers to read your documents. They will not read it between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. during their regular workday. They will very likely come after an exhausting day home, have dinner, talk to their family, and maybe at 9, 10 p.m. they will sit down and review the applications. And you could imagine if you're exhausted, you appreciate really visual cues. So use headlines for your research statement. Consider using a nice figure, clear, crisp, to make the point, to make your proposed project stand out. Whenever you list your honors experiences and presentations and publications, if necessary, describe them, right? Who knows about honor which you received on your specific campus with that specific title? Maybe people don't know how competitive it was to get this award. Feel free to use one line to explain actually the meaning of those awards. Whenever you get back feedback from maybe reviewers who help you craft the applications, embrace the feedback, really, completely. Don't push it away and say, oh, they don't know anything about it. Well, if they don't understand it, how should reviewers understand it? So embrace it. And also, professional development, throughout your career, you will always get feedback. And you have to start being able to work with that feedback in a productive way. Spell check and embrace the formatting guideline from NSF GRFP. If it's not formatted properly, it will not be reviewed. Don't do that mistake. Select, contact, and confirm your reference letter writers early on and inform them about intellectual merit and broad impacts. And the last thing which I would like to share with you is sketch out your personal GRFP application readiness timeline and add your action items. So I would recommend on a sheet of paper, just make an error. Here's your deadline, or here's your deadline, and then fill in all the different actions you have to do to be ready to submit on time, and submit it, if possible, at least 1-2 days before the deadline. So I think I'm almost on the mark of 20 minutes, and I would actually like to invite Audrey O'Rourke, Johanna Masterson, and Matthew Howell to go on video. Excellent. I see Johanna and Matthew. Matthew, you are paused with video. You're back here. And let me see. I don't see Audrey yet, but she might be hidden. I will look for Audrey and invite her to join our little circle. In the meantime, a big thank you to both of you and all three of you to be here today and to share your experiences with our audience. I would really appreciate if you could quickly introduce yourself and share a little bit about your personal story, how you have actually found out about GRFP and how you have prepared yourself for this competitive fellowship. So let's start maybe on my right side with Johanna.
Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here today. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk to you. So my name is Johanna Masterson. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Oklahoma Norman campus. And that's actually where I heard about the NSF GRFP for the first time. I was lucky enough to spend 3 years doing undergraduate research in our chemistry and biochemistry department at OU. And my mentor knew that I wanted to go to graduate school rather than be a medical doctor, which was, I think, very prominent in our department. And so to help support my goal, she knew that it would be very important for me to find opportunities, especially for funding, because that can be very helpful when looking for graduate schools. And so I actually applied as an undergraduate first, but was not awarded the fellowship the first time, and then decided after my initial experience to apply again as a first-year graduate student. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. And let's go now to the other panel, Matthew.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, George, for the opportunity to chat with everybody. I went to Wofford College for my undergraduate years, and that was a small liberal arts college in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and there were very limited research opportunities. And so I went to the European Bioinformatics Institute in Hingston, England, and Virginia Tech over 2 different summers to do 3-month internships. And after graduation, I ended up going to Yale to spend 2 years as a lab tech because I didn't feel like I had performed enough research in my undergraduate years to be ready, just personally, to drive a thesis to completion. And so I was exposed to the GRFP. I had friends at both Wofford and Yale that had applied, and so I got to hear their experiences going through it. And when I started graduate school at UConn, I had the person who's now my advisor, as well as another trusted faculty member, just advised me that based on my resume at the time, that it would be a safer gamble to apply as a first-year student instead of waiting another year. And so I did that.
Great, thank you for sharing, Matthew. And I think Audrey is connected via audio. Audrey,
Yes.
do you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly fine.
To echo what everyone else said, thank you for having us here today. I'm really fortunate I feel to have this opportunity to share with everyone what I learned through this process. And I'm sorry that I can't share my webcam with you, but I'll be talking to you for the rest of this, I guess. I went to Rice University for my undergrad, where I studied earth science, and the focus there was kind of in geology. So I was a pre-med student for most of my undergraduate career, and I was studying earth science in that time. I liked geology, but not enough to make a career out of it, I thought. And I actually ended up applying to a research program my junior year when I was kind of questioning whether or not I still wanted to be pre-med. It was an earth science research program called the NASA Student Airborne Research Program. And that was where I actually first heard about the GRFP, but at the time I didn't really think I was going to grad school. But I really liked the project that I worked on. It was in atmospheric science, and I kept working on that through my senior year. And kind of late in the game, I realized that I wanted to continue this kind of work and do this potentially for a career. So at that point, I figured it was too late to find and apply for some good grad programs. So I took a gap year. But during my senior year, I kept working on this project, and I had 2 advisors who suggested that if I wanted to continue this kind of work, if I wanted to go to grad school, that I should apply for the GRFP. So at that point, I'd heard of it, but wasn't super familiar with it. Started a little bit late. I had like a month before the deadline, I think, but worked through that. And similar to Johanna, I didn't receive it my first time. So I'm 2 years into my PhD program now. At the beginning of my second year, I applied for my second time, and that's when I was awarded the GRFP. And I didn't apply my first year just because with the advice of my advisors and my own feeling, I didn't feel ready to write a competitive application, I guess. So I waited for a bit and tried again my second year, and was recently awarded the GRFP.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, Audrey. So one thing which was really interesting to hear that several of you applied several times for the GRFP, and you have taken the feedback from the reviewers. You have digested the feedback and planned accordingly for a new application. So I think there's a clear message that getting feedback is really valuable and can set you up for success. Of course, it would be great to always strike with the first try, but this is not really, I would say, how GRFP necessarily typically works, but also other things, right? Think about writing a grant proposal. Very likely, if you write your very first grant proposal, an R01 or a research grant for NSF, oh, you will get reviews back where you think, oh my God, why did they write that? But anyway, embracing that information and making something better out of it next time is really a critical thing what we have to embrace as professionals in STEM overall. So I mentioned earlier intellectual merit and broader impacts. Before we move on actually to the two different statements, the personal statement and the research statement, and we'll talk about that, a quick question. What type of broader impact activities have you done, and were you entirely clear what you would like to communicate early on, or how did you actually condense your broader impact story in your holistic application package? Who would like to go first? I think I look at Johanna right now.
Yeah, I can answer first. So I wasn't really sure initially how to, as you said, package the work that I had done, especially as an undergraduate student. I had significant leadership experience it's a social sorority, but it's focused on supporting and uplifting women in STEM. And so a lot of our work, so it's composed mostly or completely of women pursuing science or technical degrees. And a lot of that involved mentorship both within and outreach outside of that organization. And so I had experienced that and had a lot of leadership experience in that. And so a lot of my outreach was tied to that organization. And I also had some mentorship experience just on campus and within my lab. So I was a mentor through the Honors College mentorship program. So incoming freshman students, particularly out-of-state students. The school I went to was predominantly in-state students, and so it could feel a little bit isolating for people to not really know anyone. So it was good to mentor incoming freshmen, particularly in STEM fields, and kind of connect them to resources. And so that's kind of how I structured it. In my broader impact section of my statement, just had minor headings underneath that said, this is my leadership experience, and then this is my outreach experience, and then this is my mentorship experience. And I found that that helped keep things pretty clear in communicating what I had actually done in those roles.
Excellent, thank you. Matthew or Audrey, do you want to comment on the broader impacts activities question?
After Audrey.
Sure. So in undergrad, I was pretty involved in mentoring. I was mentored my first year. Before even going into my first year, I was part of a program where I received a lot of mentorship. So I kind of realized the value in that in higher education, and later on I realized how important it was in STEM. So I mentored through lots of different programs on campus. There were programs for first-year students, for first-generation students, for underrepresented minorities, different things like that. So I would kind of seek out those opportunities because it felt really meaningful for me to mentor my peers. And I also had some outreach activities that were mainly focused in climate science and disseminating information about climate change. So I was part of a nonprofit group where we worked on that kind of stuff. So in writing these into my broader impacts section of my personal statement, I actually worked with my advisor at the time, who was reviewing, she was one of my reference writers, and she reviewed my research statement and my personal statements for me. So she kind of helped me organize it in such a way that everything that I did or that I was talking about in my statement, it was clear kind of what I got out of it and how I plan to use that experience to continue my broader impacts as a fellow if I were awarded the GRFP.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew?
So my story is similar to my peers. I did a lot of teaching and also a lot of peer tutoring at Wofford and then as a first-year student at UConn. And so I framed my broader impacts really focusing in on that, as well as different experiences mentoring undergraduates. I was a little anxious that I had not done enough in the line of broader impacts, and that was a concern that really stayed with me in the entire application development and in the waiting period. But I had gotten advice to focus on what I had done, and I, like Audrey said, the mentoring was very personally meaningful to me, and so I think I was able to focus on that in an authentic way that was well received by the reviewers.
Excellent, thank you, Matthew. Before we actually talk about the personal statement and how you have crafted that and who has given you feedback about the personal statement, I would like to take maybe 1 minute to reply or to answer some of the audience questions which came in and which are related to what you have shared with us. How many times can you actually apply for the NSF GRFP? So if you are an undergraduate degree holder and you never enrolled into a graduate program, there is no limit. You could apply every year once until you enter graduate school. Whenever you entered graduate school, you have to make a choice. Either you apply in the first year or in the second year. And there's always the big question, oh, what should I choose? What is better, first year or second year? There's no golden rule for that. My recommendation is really to talk to your research advisor, to talk to a trusted mentor who has potentially had experience reviewing GRFP applications to get a feeling if he or she would really view your application package competitive. Something what I can share with you, NSF is really looking at 4 different levels of applications and compares those applications according to the level within that bracket, right? All undergraduate students, they are reviewed together. First year graduate students are reviewed together. Second year graduate students are reviewed together. And there's also a 4th level if you dropped out of higher education for some time and you would like to go back, that's a 4th level. But the majority of applications are really found in the first 3 levels, of course. So there is no golden rule for when to apply for first or second year. If you have only one shot, talk to your mentors. There was another question about reference letters who should you ask for references? In general, it would be very good to have at least one reference letter from someone who could speak about your ability to conduct research. 1 or 2 strong letters from that area would be beneficial. If there's another strong letter from another professional who could speak maybe from the angle of industry, if you have done an industry internship, I think that would be super strong as well, right? Or if you were really engaged in significant outreach activities and there's someone who led a nonprofit organization where you have engaged in a significant way, I think that letter will have a significant weight too. But let me just bounce back the question and throw it to our panelists. Who have you asked? Were all of the reference letter writers research advisors at some point in your student career? Anyone first?
Yeah, I can speak on that.
Sure, Audrey.
So in my entire research career, I guess, I've always been co-advised. I've always had 2 advisors on any given project. So that kind of typically makes it easier for me to find reference writers, because if I'm thinking advisor, then there's already 2 of them. So my first time applying, I asked my 2 research advisors to write my letter, and also my current boss, I guess, she was also a research advisor, but I was working on my project and working in a lab at the same time, unrelated to that project. So she was my 3rd advisor, I guess, and she has been in STEM in academia for a long time. Her husband used to be a reviewer for the GRFP, and I know she's written tons of letters, so I figured that she would be a good person, and I thought she knew me well and could say good things about me, hopefully, for my letter. And then my second time applying, I also had my 2 advisors, and this same advisor, even though I wasn't working for her anymore, we've maintained a pretty strong relationship, and she was willing to write my letter. And then my 2 advisors this second time were my current thesis advisors.
Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Joanna?
Yeah, I would say, so my first time applying was my senior year of undergraduate. And so by that point, I had already done a summer research experience program, actually in the lab that I am currently working in. And so I had asked my PI, who oversaw that summer project, to write me a letter, especially because I knew that my mentor within that lab was very supportive of me applying. He had actually reached out to me to make sure that I would apply for the program. And then my undergraduate PI, I also asked her as well. Once again, I knew that she would be super supportive. She had reached out to me as well to see if I would be applying, and was encouraging me to apply for as many fellowship and graduate programs as possible. And so I just talked with them about that. And then my 3rd letter, I asked my organic chemistry 2 professor to write, because that had been one of my favorite classes. He had been one of my favorite and most supportive professors, and it seemed to make sense to me, given that that was the research that I was proposing, to show that I had excelled and built a relationship within that class.
Great, thank you. Matthew, a quick comment about your reference letters.
So I got letters from my now advisor, and also the boss that I worked for 2 years at Yale, and then I asked the person that I had done the next most recent undergraduate research experience. I did get a comment on the reviews for the GRFP, even though I was awarded a fellowship. They had said that they would have instead asked for a letter from my main undergraduate research advisor.
Great, thank you. So some of you mentioned undergraduate research experiences, and I think it might be a good time quickly to point out this year is especially challenging, right? With the pandemic going on, a lot of, if not all of the research experiences are canceled. The in-person experiences are used, and others. It will be critical to demonstrate that you have some research experience in a GRFP application, regardless if there was a pandemic, right? But if your research experience was canceled, there might be other ways how you could get a foot in the door to demonstrate that you have done some kind of research. I would reach out to medical centers, to other PIs, and say, in a very nice and polite way, well, I was scheduled to have a research experience. I really would like to have that experience over summer, and I realize that no in-person research is done. Is there anything what we could do, what I could do to help analyzing data or contributing to an ongoing project right now in your lab remotely? Those experiences will probably not be paid, but there's the payoff that you have contributed to a research project, and you could talk about it in your personal statement and research statement, and the reference letter writer could talk about it as well. And it shows that you're really serious, right? You're serious about research. You're serious about trying to get into grad school and succeeding in graduate school. So, but very likely it's just for undergraduate students who have more lack of research experience at this point. So be proactive, reach out to researchers at universities, but also consider reaching out to individuals at nonprofit research laboratories or nonprofit organizations and say, well, I have time this summer. Is there any research project I could contribute, right? And even if it's not, if you apply in inorganic chemistry, for example, and even if that research project is not in inorganic chemistry, maybe it's in anthropology, something crazy, right? Which is not really field related. It is a research experience, right? And it shows that you're interested in STEM, but you have to pitch in your narrative why this specific time, summer 2020, led you to that experience, and what have you learned in that during that experience, and how would you translate that experience into the chemical sciences? That is really, really important. So, as promised, we will focus a little bit more on the personal and research statements. And I would just, maybe Audrey, I would ask you first again, which strategy have you developed to develop this particular statement, and how have you worked in feedback that you have received over time from peers, maybe from your advisor, maybe from other mentors, to make sure that your statement is in top shape?
Yeah. So I think best piece of advice that fortunately I got early on was something that you mentioned in one of the slides earlier, that your personal statement really needs to show the reviewers that you're a unique student, to do something, write something to set you apart from the other applications that they might have to read. So I started off writing just kind of aiming not to kind of put my CV into paragraph form, but to write about the things that I felt made me a good applicant for the GRFP, and to kind of, my advisor who helps me with this told me it's like writing a compelling story, telling people who you are, what you've experienced and what you've done to get you where you are, and how that's going to help you continue succeeding. So I kind of took my experiences as well as my broader impacts that I'd been participating in and tried to frame them in a way that made it clear what my motivations were, and that I was committed to what I was saying I was committed to, instead of just, you know, writing an application for the sake of getting some research money or something like that. And the first time I applied, that advisor who I mentioned reviewed my statement several times. We went through a few different versions, and she helped me write that. And she gave me feedback on, she knew me pretty well, so she would say something like, well, what about this time during junior year where this happened? And that kind of made me look more holistically at all my experiences, instead of just the things that I thought would make me a good GRFP applicant. So kind of looking at everything that I had been through and how it helped make me the scientist that I was. And then my second time around here in my PhD program, I actually went to the writing office on campus and sat down with someone, and they looked at my statement, helped me edit it, helped me strengthen some parts, and there were some parts that I cut down or cut out. And then I also had some past GRFP winners in my department review my statement and help me write that. So I think if you can sit down early on and think about your experiences and your kind of commitments, broader impacts, all that stuff that you want to write about, and then take a lot of time and a lot of feedback to figure out how to arrange those in a way that is compelling. I think that's what I would most strongly recommend.
Super, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Joanna?
I would really agree with everything that Audrey said, particularly framing your experiences in terms of a story. I would say what also really helped me is, as I was writing, a lot of the people that I asked to review my statements. So I asked family and friends even to review my personal statement. And I asked mentors, older graduate students within the department who I really trusted and who know me pretty well to review my statement, as well as my PI. But I would say that from feedback I got from them, I had a hard time, I think, really clearly stating what my role was in each of my experiences, particularly in my intellectual merit or research background experiences within the personal statement. And so really clearly pointing out, this is what I contributed to these projects and this is what I got out of each of these experiences really helped me. And so I think that was something I had to really sit with and think about as drafts, as we went through drafts. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Matthew?
I think the only things I would reiterate that have already been said is expect to go through lots of drafts. I don't know how many drafts I went through, but the first was the worst, and it was more of a process of it getting less bad over time. And the other thing is giving yourself weeks and months to develop your ideas instead of days. I found weeks into writing these drafts that new ideas about how to best emphasize broader impacts or intellectual merits, or going on jogs to think about how I was proposing an experiment. Were there any holes in what I was proposing, and how could I address that? So just the time to keep coming back to the drafts with fresh eyes really make a difference.
Thank you. So Matthew, Audrey, Johanna, think about which advice you have in 20 seconds or half a minute about writing and crafting the research statement. How did you really find this particular topic, and how did you really shape it in a way that it was received well by the reviewers? And as you think about that, I would like to answer a couple of other questions. So there was a question about, what if I'm working in an interdisciplinary field, which field of study should I choose? There's no guidelines, right? I would recommend really to talk to your specific advisor, to someone who has potentially reviewed in one of those two fields of studies. If it's between chemical engineering and, let's say, organic chemistry, that might be a problem, because you would have to enroll in this type of department later on if you join grad school. So make sure that you pitch your field of study in that field where you would like to join actually in a department. There was another question about how many awards are given by field. There's no set number per field. It's really just peer application pressure, right? So if there are a large number of applications in organic chemistry, the same fraction of awards will be given there in comparison to another field. There was one other question: is humor allowed in a personal statement? This question made me smile. I actually liked it. I would say it depends on the humor, right? As I said, reviewers are reading that very late, but it could potentially backfire with reviewers who would not understand your type of humor. So I would be very careful and make sure that a lot of your peers or individuals who help you read the statement feel comfortable that it's an appropriate joke or appropriate humor which you pitch there. So be very, very careful. It could backfire. So with that, I turn back to our panelists. The research statement. Any advice for our audience on the research statement? And Audrey, maybe you go first.
Yeah, so the topic for my research statement between my first and second application changed, and it wasn't an idea that I just kind of came up with specifically for the proposal. The proposals were based on projects I was already working on, and I just imagined that I had 3 more years of time and funding, and where did I want to take the project from there? So my first time applying, a lot of the reviewers, or a lot of the feedback I got from the reviewers was that it didn't seem like a well thought out project, which I think was accurate at the time. And a lot of the reason why I didn't apply my first year of grad school, why I waited for my second year, because by then I knew the field that I was in a little bit better. I had read a lot more papers. I had a better idea of what I wanted to do and how feasible those things were. So I would also say to take some time and sit down and actually get to know what it is that you're writing about. And so it doesn't come across as just this idea that you had that is probably going to be possible. You need to have a little bit more confidence and be able to demonstrate that it's a feasible project.
Right. Johanna.
So I would say that my first time, so between my times applying, I also changed the contents of my research statement. And my first time applying, I would say that I definitely did not allow enough time for me to fully develop my research idea to what it should have been before applying. So I guess the first piece of advice I would give is start really early, even just thinking about possible ideas, working with mentors on that. And my second time, that is what really helped me. So I wrote my project over, or I wrote my proposal over the project that my mentor and I developed for me within my first year of graduate study. And for me, it was really important to, especially in like the research aims section, to break it down into almost like mini projects within this bigger project to show that this was, as Audrey was saying, a very achievable and reachable goal. And I found that my my reviewers between the two application cycles, I got comments the first application cycle that were basically very critical on whether or not my project was very feasible and how well thought out it was. But the second time, my reviews were very, the reviewers seemed to think that this was a very well-grounded proposal. And I think that they received that very well.
Thank you. And Matthew.
Just to reiterate things that I found really true in my application was reading lots of papers to be able to determine how are specific questions answered in the field currently and whether a proposal actually is novel. And also, I made a point to make sure my research proposal indicated that I had access to all of the equipment that I needed to do the experiments proposed, and I got specific comments from the reviewers about how that was a plus. I know there's no formula for winning the GFP, but my advisor and other faculty members advised me to make sure that I wasn't just kind of piggybacking on what my future advisor was already working on, but to really come to the table with my own interests and background and try to apply that to maybe a theme in his lab. And I did that, and I think that was very well received.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matthew. I'm really saddened because I look at the clock and it's almost 5 p.m. Eastern time, so we're almost at the end. But before we close, a quick question for our panelists. Did you actually have self-doubt that you would be competitive for GRFP? Head nodding or shaking would be good. Okay, head nodding, head nodding. Audrey, you don't see your head. What?
Can't see my head. I'm also nodding my head.
So audience, you see everyone is nodding their head. So if you have self-doubt, that doesn't mean much. You can succeed, right? If you embrace every single bit of advice our three fantastic panelists, Audrey, Johanna, and Matthew had today, if you take advantage of the NSF program solicitation on the nsfgrfp.org website, and if we will send out the slides as well during this week, then I'm pretty sure you will be able to craft a very competitive fellowship application. And also, if you have a specific question for the GRFP related to the chemical sciences, send it to grad@acs.org and in the subject line GRFP, and I would be happy to answer those questions after this webinar. If it's a more general question, send it to info@nsfgrfp.org. That is the operations center, and they will be able to help you with that as well. A big thank you to Matthew, Johanna, and Audrey. Without you, this wouldn't have happened today. Everyone in the audience, best of luck, stay safe and healthy, and I keep the fingers crossed. Okay, have a wonderful afternoon and talk to you hopefully soon. Bye-bye.